Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ann Mason. I'm the Executive Director of the Plymouth Antiquarian Society, and I'm streaming here from the Hedge House Museum on this beautiful October day. This is one of our first Saturday history tour presentations. We have been offering these presentations virtually in 2021. The program is presented by the Plymouth Antiquarian Society and our partners at Pilgrim Hall Museum. If you've missed any of the previous presentations, please do visit our website, plymouth.antiquarian.org, where you can find those recordings. And if you're joining us through Zoom, please do use the chat feature and the Q&A feature to ask questions or send comments. And we will be happy to, I'll be monitoring that throughout the program, and I'll be happy to send those to David so he can respond to them as we go. And if you're watching on the Facebook live stream, you can use the comment section to, again, send comments, send questions, send greetings. We are so excited to welcome Dr. David Landon for this presentation today. David is the Associate Director of the Fiske Memorial Center for Archaeological Research at UMass Boston. And he has been leading the team that has been doing a series of archaeological excavations in Plymouth. And so he'll be talking today about the ongoing dig on Burial Hill and other sites in downtown Plymouth, and just sharing some of the exciting discoveries that they've made this year when they were here for their field school in June. So David, please take it away.
Thank you for that wonderfully nice introduction. I'm really happy to be here today. Talking about one of my favorite subjects, which is the archaeological work that we've been doing in Plymouth. And we have been digging at a bunch of other sites, but since our focus today is on Burial Hill and some of the firsts there, I really thought I would virtually take us to Burial Hill and focus a little bit on the results that we've had in terms of understanding some of the constructed features of the landscape there, and especially the evidence that we found for the early houses built on Burial Hill. Trying to see if I can get this to advance. There we go. This is a long-term collaborative project that we've been working on. And we started this, I guess, almost 10 years ago now. We're closing in on 10 years that we've been working on this. And we've been working very closely. The university's been collaborating with Plymouth Patuxent Museum and the town of Plymouth. The town of Plymouth has really given us a lot of access to properties. And in particular, it's taken us some time working with the town to get everybody comfortable with the notion that we're digging along the edges of the margins of Burial Hill. We were working on this project very much in the lead up to the 400th in 2020. As you all know, that got changed quite a bit by global circumstances that we're still in. We weren't able to actually go out and do any excavation in 2020, but we were able to return back this summer to Plymouth and had a very interesting and exciting summer in Plymouth. We've been doing our work as a series of annual summer field schools, starting in 2013. And for each of these summers, we've been for about 5 weeks with a group of students and faculty and staff from UMass Boston and from other universities. And this has very much been a collaborative project. And the students in particular have had the opportunity to kind of spend 5 weeks of the summer in Plymouth working on some really interesting archaeology in a very kind of complicated and complex environment. 2021 in particular was a really important year for us to be able to be out in Plymouth because UMass Boston was remote for the entire year. So some of our students who came out had actually never met me face-to-face, never met any of their fellow students face-to-face in a class. So we had some students who were digging with us this summer who were face-to-face in a class for the first time. And that was actually, as you can imagine, a really amazing experience for them. After struggling through a year of the pandemic and remote learning, they got to spend 5 weeks face-to-face with a group of other students and faculty and staff, working in Plymouth, doing some really amazing archaeology. It wasn't just a great experience because we were back in the field, but we had really interesting and good results with our archaeology this year as well. And as you can imagine, that was really an important experience for everyone. I've tallied it up now with all of these years that I've been spending 5 weeks digging in Plymouth. I'm approaching 1 year of my life digging in Plymouth now. So we've managed to learn a lot over the course of that time. And one of the major focuses of where we've been digging is along the margins of Burial Hill. You know, sadly, we can't walk around and kind of do this as a tour on Burial Hill today. Hopefully we'll have that opportunity again in the future. It's really an amazing historic landscape in so many ways. A National Historic Register site with all kinds of grave markers spanning all kinds of time periods, lots of memorials on it. And it's also very much kind of a historic landscape in the sense that it had other uses, this hill, besides just being a burial ground. One of those was for the first about 5 decades of the Plymouth colony settlement. This was actually known as Fort Hill instead of Burial Hill. And the top of the hill was the location of the original fort for the settlement, which then stretched out down the hill, down Leyden Street towards the water. And the houses ran out down that road towards the water. The fort and meeting house were at the top. The top of the hill was chosen as the location for the fort to make a cannon emplacement that could protect the harbor in particular. And then the entire kind of community in the first early years of this settlement, the entire community was encircled with a palisade, or as they described it at the time, was impaled. So a kind of a wooden stockade fence going down from the top of the hill and enclosing the houses down towards the water at the harbor. Now, I'm giving you this description of where this is located on scant historical evidence, but evidence which has been added to by the archaeology. So the earliest map that puts any parts of this on the ground is actually shown here on the lower right-hand screen, the Beers map of Plymouth from the 1870s. And as you can see, it says Burial Hill, formerly Fort Hill, and it marks some locations on the landscape saying site of the watchtower and also site of the old fort that the Pilgrims also used as a place of worship. So it places these locations on the ground, and based on that, there's a historic marker on the top of Burial Hill showing the site of the first fort. Now, before we began our archaeological project, there was no earlier maps or real kind of evidence that placed this on Burial Hill. I'm happy to say that one of the real discoveries of our archaeological project has been confirming parts of the settlement on Burial Hill and confirming also we've recovered parts of the Palisade line that encircled the early settlement. So we've come a long way towards putting some of this on the ground on Burial Hill in kind of a scientific fashion. Now, if you look at this map of the Beers map, you can see that the historic churches that still stand around town square are shown as those dark rectangles at the very bottom of the image. A school is illustrated further to the north along School Street, and a series of buildings are located along School Street, a stable and some other structures that are shown there. And our archaeological work really focused for many years, kind of starting up at the location on School Street, where the school is shown, and working our way south, working behind those 19th century historic structures and kind of targeting the area between the structures and the start of burials further up the hill. So there's a narrow gap of undeveloped land along the edge of School Street that we've been working in. And here we've actually I'm showing you the main area where our archaeological work has been located. And we've in this area confirmed a number of features related to the early settlement. Here's an aerial view of this was not this last summer, but 2017, as you can see. We've been working in the same location for a while, and here you can see we've got an excavation going in front of this burial crypt on the edge of Burial Hill. So this is, we're kind of in our aerial view up above School Street now, kind of looking to the west and a little bit to the south. And you can see there's excavations going on both behind and in front of this burial crypt. In the area in front of the burial crypt, we recovered a series of 17th century features, but no real intact buildings there. But behind the burial crypt, where we've been digging for the last, concentrated our digging for the last few years, we've actually found the remains of at least 2 structures plus parts of the Palisade wall there. And through all this work, we've been able to kind of puzzle out which areas are still undisturbed. And as we look at it very systematically, you know, one of the challenges of working in the downtown in Plymouth is that we end up with very small areas where the early parts of the town are still preserved. And the kind of consequences of the town kind of building up and continuing to occupy the same location is that there's been a lot of construction that has, you know, destroyed or removed or altered the earliest fabric of the town. So the area that's on this aerial photo that's in gray has all been disturbed in some way. You can see we have a little patch in front of the burial crypt. The burial crypt itself, obviously disturbed. Part of our cuts our archaeological site in this area in half. And then the cemetery really begins up the hill. And we've got a kind of a narrow gap behind the crypt where we also have intact deposits. So in the front, we've mostly identified what we would call yard deposits. Behind the Palisade, we have 17th century buildings. I'm sorry, behind the crypt, we have 17th century buildings, the location of the Palisade, and an area where we've got a lot of Wampanoag artifacts on this site as well. Now, when we're trying to actually figure out the nature of our buildings and our construction, one of the difficulties we find is that the time period that we're digging for, all of our buildings are constructed with what's called post and ground construction. So Wampanoag structures from this time period are built with posts in the ground, and the colonial structures from this time period are also built with posts in the ground. So instead of making a stone foundation for a house or a brick foundation for a house, people would dig post holes and put a wooden post in and then build a wall in between those posts to construct the wall of the building. And you can see on the image of the house that's kind of been plucked up from the ground, it's been doing that to show what the footprint looks like of these post holes and areas where the posts were. And on the other side of this image is the frame of a weatu, a native structure where you can see the posts in the ground as well. So the interesting thing is, even something that we would think of as substantial as this palisade that I described, we know from looking at contemporary examples that palisade construction was very similar. So this image is showing some examples from the palisade at Jamestown Fort, where they've found some bigger stretches of palisade. They have the benefit there that they are not digging underneath an existing town that's as vibrant as Plymouth is. So there hasn't been quite as much alteration to their site, but you can see there's two parts to this image. One is showing what these post holes look like when they're kind of fresh in the ground, and you can see it's just a series of dark soil stains, a series of dark soil stains in a row where posts have been dug into the ground. The other side of this image is after they've dug out a series of the bottoms of these posts to show the actual post mold where the posts were in the ground. So this kind of construction is literally just cutting down relatively small trees and then putting them side by side in a trench in the ground and burying them in to make the base of a fence. So when this is gone, what this looks like is a series of kind of dark soil stains from rotted posts in the ground. So the archaeological evidence for all of this construction is soil stains in the ground. Here's a nice aerial view of some of our work behind the crypt. So the road and the car parked at the very top of this image is on School Street. So this image is looking kind of a little bit east and southeast. You can see we're digging around the roots at the base of a beautiful historic copper beech tree. So we've been making a lot of effort not to damage this beautiful tree in Burial Hill during our work. And our back dirt pile is on top of the crypt in this image. So that'll help give you some perspective of where we are on Burial Hill. And in this area, if we remove all of the people and activity, this is what our excavation area looked like with everybody out of the way. And what we found here, right, is we've exposed in this area part of the Palisade line. That gives us the ability to kind of define inside and outside the original settlement. As I mentioned, outside of the original settlement, we have an area that really looks like a contemporary Wampanoag activity. There are a variety of pit features outside in the area outside the settlement near the Palisade. Quite honestly, some of those pit features are kind of unclear about what they were used for. Not a lot of artifacts in them, but very organically enriched soil. We did a lot of sampling of one of the big pit features outside the Palisade this summer. So we scooped a lot of dirt into plastic bags to bring back to try and look for microscopic and small remains within the soil that might give us clues to the use of the pit. So we brought back samples to look for charcoal and seeds and small fish scales or things like that. We're going to try and see if there's any pollen preserved in any of the soil. One of the students working with us has been working on identifying phytoliths in soil, which are kind of fossilized plant cells that survive even when a lot of other evidence doesn't. So, and chemical analysis of these soils, there's no artifacts, so we're scooping a lot of soil in bags and kind of doing a kind of scientific analysis to see if we can really understand, like, why are these kind of dark, rich soil pits? What was their use? Now, the obvious thing there is, an obvious interpretation is that we're some kind of organic enrichment waste is going in there that's making these pit features, kind of enriching the soil. So far, it doesn't look like we've gotten kind of a privy deposit, because a lot of times those have lots of little seeds in them. So we're not really clear what the pit features are, but it gives us inside and outside, and we're able to identify part of the Palisade line.
David, we actually have a question about the post holes and the
Sure.
posts. Were these posts found in England as well, or is this an adaptation by the settlers? And wondering about Native peoples using the same type of construction, or Native peoples using the English construction as a model for their structures as well.
That's a great question. And I think it's not fully answered yet. So in the kind of the history of people looking at architecture in Plymouth, this has always been one of the questions. Where did these kind of building techniques come from? How much do they have English antecedents, and how much are they related to the kind of new colonial environment? And a lot of, particularly at the beginning, in the time around the American bicentennial in the 70s, when people were looking at houses, they were really trying to do anything they could to find an English example. So scouring through and like, okay, it's weird, but we're going to find something that seems to fit. We've kind of been taking the opposite approach and really thinking like, okay, well, people have played that angle out. Can we see anything that looks different here? Certainly the kind of incredible availability of wood as a building material is a new thing in the colonial environment. So that simplifies access to certain kinds of construction materials here and potentially changes the buildings a little. In terms of the like Palisade construction, Native people in this region are definitely constructing palisades in this same fashion. So part of the question is like, who's adopting this from who, or what kind of interplay is there? And some people have made the case that this kind of palisade construction, which is shared by Native and colonial people at this time, definitely has some overlap in terms of possibly the colonists borrowing aspects of this from Native settlements. But that's still kind of an open question in some ways. But good question. So either way, what the Palisade line shows up when we find it is kind of a dark soil stain, because we're looking at rotten wood posts in the ground. So this is one of those situations where we're digging in and we're like, wow, okay, could this be the Palisade? Look at all these posts in a line. And we have to kind of convince ourselves through a lot of head scratching and careful thinking about it, about what it is that we're seeing in the ground. So one of the ways we do that is by bisecting some of these posts. And here you can see a really dark, where we've cut one of these post stains in half. Here you can see the really dark imprint that's left from a rotten post in the ground. And there's actually a nail here as well. And so we can really identify this as like a constructed feature. And being the kind of person I am, or the people we are, our gang, we're like, are we going to say that we found the Palisade? We found the Palisade post. How are we going to prove this to everyone? Well, we actually dug one of these entire post stains out and brought it back in a block to the lab so we could archive it and make a permanent record of it. So this is my colleague Dennis Piota, and you can see what he's doing is wrapping a block of soil in plaster, kind of like the plaster and gauze, kind of like doing a cast and letting that dry. And then we lifted this and brought it back intact to the lab to create a permanent record of one of these posts out of the Palisade line. We also this year went back and kind of extended our excavation to try and trace out more of the Palisade line. And that dark soil stain continued where we expected it to continue. But the construction in the new area that we looked at was slightly different, because rather than a series of posts, vertical posts in the ground, in the area that we opened up this summer, there was a horizontal post at the, or horizontal sill at the bottom of the trench for that section of the Palisade. Now, I can't tell you that I understand why that's the case, but I think what we have is evidence for different building or repair episodes in parts of the Palisade. So I think there was some variability that was brought on by the kind of impermanent nature of this kind of construction. So if you're taking 4 or 6 inch trees and putting them in the ground in post holes, those only have a limited lifespan before they actually start to rot out. So this undoubtedly was a structure that needed to have lots of kind of repair and maintenance. And I think what we might have found is an area where repairs or maintenance took place to, shore up the bottom of the Palisade. Inside of the settlement, we have evidence for 2 buildings so far. One of those buildings seems older than the other. It is the building 1 here with a deep floor and daub wall fall is how I'm describing it. So this building was cut into the hillside and constructed with daubed walls. So this is taking a kind of a clay mixture and using it on the inside like a plaster to make the inside of the walls, presumably clabbered it on the exterior, and using the actual bank of the hillside to form part of the walls of the building. Building 2 seems to be a little bit later and is not as much cut into the bank. They seem to be connected by a little passageway. So the deep building has been one of the major kind of focus of our excavation, because that cellar hole or the building floor, really, it's not really a cellar, but the building floor has been filled in over the years. So it's about 4 feet or so below the current grade. So major digging to try and go down to this deeply buried building floor. And immediately over the bottom of the building floor is a level of daub from the walls of this building. As the building came down, these clay plastered walls on the interior got exposed to the elements, and that clay collapsed down and washed in over the floor of the building. So our building floor in this kind of deep building is capped with a layer of clay-like material, this daub, that came down off the walls and sealed the floor. So this is good in some ways for archaeology, because it means that the deposits on the floor were sealed. So we have, good preservation. It tells us something about the construction of the building, that the walls were daubed. You can see in this image how difficult this digging is around all of the roots of this beautiful tree. And we could get some understanding of the use of different areas of the building by looking at what was on different areas of the floor.
So David, we actually have a question about how you do your digging, and one of our listeners notes that the edges of these holes are so straight, and how do you do that? And it doesn't look like a common shovel that you're using.
So, this is one of the stories about archaeologists. We dig in square or rectangular holes with straight edges. So we do use shovel some, but for the walls, our most common tool is a mason's trowel. So we're using as our main digging tool mason's trowels, which if you've ever used a mason's trowel, it's a very stiff-bladed triangular trowel. We sharpen those, and we use those to cut very straight edges on our excavation. And on this illustration, you can also see there's lots of tags that we've put in on the walls as we dig. We mark all of the soil layers as we go down. So we're scraping with that trowel and then marking each different soil layer as we're doing our digging. It's very specific kind of work. And part of this is trying to train, since we're doing this at the field school, train all the students in making nice straight walls for all of our digging. That helps us with our mapping. That's the main reason we're digging in such straight walled units, mapping as we go.
Well, and a second question connected to the soils, do you test the organic content of the darker and lighter soils to support your conclusions?
So yes, and that's
coming up, huh?
a great segue to my next slide.
Great.
So, as I said, with the pits, we did a lot of soil sampling to collect samples, and we do lots of sampling of the soils for different kinds of analysis. And in this building, this is Anya Gruber, one of the students who's working with us. She's working on her PhD right now at the University of Texas at Austin. And she's been in charge of a lot of our sampling because she's doing a lot of the analysis of microscopic material in the soil, especially pollen and phytoliths. And on this image, Anya's smiling because she's getting great samples off the floor of the building. So areas, that last slide is part of that floor of that building was very rich and dark, where there's evidence of burning is really good for sampling because it means that small bits of wood and seeds can be preserved by being charred. And this summer was a very smiley summer for Anya because we did in fact find the location of the hearth inside this building on the building floor, and we're able to actually, there was charcoal left in a pile on the floor from where they had been burning a fire inside. So we were able to collect samples directly from the hearth inside of this building. So we can look at the wood that's there and try and see what wood is being chosen for firewood. And we can also try and see if any seeds that were being cooked got into the fire accidentally and are preserved there because they got burned. And this is Anya's dissertation project for her dissertation project. And one interesting thing, I'm not really talking much about evidence of the Wampanoag village of Patuxet, but also this summer on Coles Hill, we found a Wampanoag hearth that was intact too. So we were able to actually sample a Wampanoag hearth and this early Plymouth colony hearth. So we're going to be able to compare those and get some really good information. So yeah, smiley summer for Anya out digging with us. In terms of what this looks like, I've used my artistic license This is me using my artistic license and my best interpretation to try and kind of give you an idea of what this area might have looked like. I'm making big parts of this up, and my artistic skills are not professional, but I'm trying to give an idea. So you can see I've done two structures here backed up essentially to the Palisade. So the Palisade seems to have been kind of parallel to and right behind the structure that was cut into the bank. And then the structure that was cut into the bank, there are parts of this that we feel pretty good about in terms of our interpretation. So far, no evidence of any chimney on either building. So no brick chimney, but also no daubed chimney. So sometimes they would take this clay plaster and make little pieces of a chimney at the top of the building. But then after the fire goes through there for a long time, you get kind of soot buildup on that daub. And when the building falls down, you can sometimes find pieces of that daub with the soot and burning evidence from being used as a chimney. We have not found anything like that, despite finding the fireplace, the hearth inside the deeply buried building. We haven't found any burned daub, so no sign of a chimney. So just a fire on the floor of the building. The building was divided on the interior, so there was some kind of an interior wall that set off that one side of the building with the fire from the other side of the building. There was, in fact, at least one diamond pane window, despite this being a structure dug into the hillside. Either when it was initially constructed or at some later point, a diamond paned window was put in, because when the building came down, parts of that window fell down onto the floor. So we actually have glass and window came on the floor of the building from a window falling in. These two buildings were connected with some kind of an interior passageway that seems to have gone down into the deep building cut in the hillside, and there was a little kind of cobbled walkway down into the building. Note that the location of the doors is a fiction at the moment. We don't know where the doors might be located, but we put doors on here. But some aspects of this building seem pretty good, and we're able to take a lot of artifacts off of the building floor. Parts of these are what we would think of very much as kind of like domestic house artifacts. So here you can see kind of a cluster of pottery and broken glass. We've got some spoons off the floor of the building, milk pans, some storage crocks, what you would think of very much as kind of ordinary household trash. So someone was clearly living in this building at some point in time. Some of that is a little bit nicer. This is an example of the rim of a plate or a charger. A nice piece of tin glazed Dutch or English. You can see nice and colorful. Something slightly fancier to go on the table. And this is more of an outlier than kind of normal for the area around these two buildings. A lot of the kind of common 17th century artifacts scattered through these buildings. So mostly coarse redwares of different types, glazed on the inside because they're very utilitarian. So it's not fancy vessels, but big storage vessels and kind of food storage and processing vessels. We've got some German brown stoneware. Those were more bottles for liquids typically, pipe stems and shot, and also some green glazed pottery that's either English border ware or a Dutch ware. This is actually kind of what we would think of as typical household materials from this time in the early 17th century. We've also got a few, though. What's interesting really about this structure, and it's kind of coming into focus for us a little bit more as we've been working on this. This also has a cluster of a small number of objects that are also point more to the commercial side of Colony. And when we try and go back to the historic accounts of the construction of buildings, lots of aspects of what we're finding match up. Those accounts are thin, but they talked about daubed-walled buildings and with clapboards, and you know, they described. There's a description of some of the houses there as you know, there's a bunch of houses and a couple of them are actually not okay. So I would say our house that's cut into the hillside is not one of the nice houses. But they also, one of the historic descriptions also says some structures were built, you know, people built some houses and some for the company. And I think we have some artifacts in this structure that point to it being more in line with kind of the commercial or company side of the colony. One of those was kind of our kind of unique surprise at the end of one season. On the floor of building 2, we started excavating what we thought was going to be a tool of some kind, a shovel blade or a hoe blade, but instead turned out to be much larger. And so this is us kind of lifting this iron, this piece of iron out of the ground to give you, it gives you some kind of scale. You can get a sense of the scale with the people involved in this. And here's a look at it. You know, it's hard to tell how big it is in this photo, right? That's why people help. But this is a piece of worked iron plate stock. So there were kind of two main ways of making a big piece of iron. One was making molten iron and pouring it into a mold and making a piece of cast iron. The other way to make a big piece of iron was to pound it out in the manner of a blacksmith. And this is a piece of sheet iron that's been pounded out in the manner of a blacksmith. So wrought means literally worked. So worked by hand to pound this out. And the size of it and thickness of it make it a special purpose piece. So this is not something that a blacksmith would make, but something that it would come out of an actual iron forge where they were pounding out iron plate. So this really, our best interpretation of this really is that this is raw material. So iron that's being shipped as a raw material for use in the colony. Why it ended up on the floor of this building and not being cut up by the blacksmith and used remains a mystery. We also have a bale seal from these kind of really from the kind of passageway between these two buildings. One of the first artifacts that we found that gave us a clue that we were in one of these buildings was this English bale seal. And this is about the size of a quarter or a half dollar. And these were made out of lead and crimped onto bolts of trade cloth. And this one is marked on both sides. On one side, you can see there's a 30, which is showing the size of the bolt of cloth. On the other side is a stamp that was essentially a government inspection stamp showing where the cloth was made and that had, you know, it had been properly taxed and inspected. And so these are attached to big bolts of trade cloth. So this would have come on a bolt of trade cloth sent from England. It's dated 1625 to 1649, so it helps give us the date for the building. And it's also related to trade. We've got 2 English patent farthings from this area of the site. The one on the left is one from our excavation. The one on the right is a museum collection one that gives you an idea of what this would have looked like if it was in better shape. So 2 early coins also associated with these structures, again, pointing a little more towards the kind of commercial side of this. And then probably the most interesting artifact from this summer is what we've identified as a coin weight. So this actually came off the floor, the deeply buried floor, where we were digging at the end of this summer. And this summer's excavation on Burial Hill, each year when we finish, we fill our excavation back in. And when I tell people that, a lot of times people are like, oh, it's too bad you can't leave that site open and let people go and see and look at what you've been doing. And that's actually really hard to do. That's harder to do than you might imagine, because if we leave big excavation areas open, they don't weather very well. So as it rains and with the change of the seasons, those nice straight walls that we spent so much effort digging out with our mason's trowels and marking all of our soil layers start to wash down in like the daub did into our deep hole. So we risk the excavation areas actually collapsing in. And we're also risk, leaving a giant hole open right at the edge of the burial ground, which doesn't really fit with this historic landscape. And then in 2019, when we left, we filled this all in, and we never expected that it would be 2 years before we were back. So the circumstances of the year made it a much longer period. So we filled this all in. So we started this summer. We started this summer by redigging our way down through all the dirt that we'd put back into the hole to go back down to the level of the floor of the building. And I have to say, it's a testament to the sense of enthusiasm and excitement that the students brought to this project that they handled that job with a lot of grace and maintain their sense of enthusiasm. So sometimes, digging out your own fill out of a hole is not always the most exciting part of archaeology. But we dug our way back down to the floor of the building this summer, and were able to collect additional artifacts off the floor. And as I said, this coin weight was probably the most kind of interesting and exciting artifact off the floor of the building. Sometimes small artifacts are very much exciting to us.
Well, and David, we have a question about the coin weight and how it was used, what it was used for.
Sure. So what these were, great question. What the heck does coin weight mean? So what these were was, these were very special purpose metal discs manufactured to essentially check whether silver and gold coinage that was in circulation was legitimate, to make sure it wasn't counterfeit, some other kind of metal, and also to make sure that people hadn't clipped so much of the edges of the coin that it was underweight. So it was quite literally designed to weigh a coin, and they were made actually then to go on a scale. Where we'd put the coin on one side of the scale and the coin weight on the other side of the scale, and we would literally weigh the coin to see if it had the amount of silver or gold in it that it was supposed to. And this one is, since this is a special manufactured item, a craftsperson made this by hand to try and make this for a particular coin, and the the pride in that is shown in them marking their weights. So I put one again in on someone's hand to give you a sense of the scale of this. So this is like a small postage stamp, then trying to give you a little bit of some of the detail, and it's hard to see here. So I grabbed a museum example to give you a better example, but it has an open hand in it with an H and an F and a 4 and a little, I'm not sure what this symbol is, and that matches what's on one side, and the other side is this stylized cross on the other side. Now, the open hand from other people these are well known on European archaeological sites. So the open hand is a symbol of the manufacturing city of Antwerp. And the H and the F are actually maker's marks for Hans Fonck, who was working in Antwerp from 1577 to 1603. So potentially we have what is legitimately a 16th century artifact on Burial Hill. The reverse of this is this stylized cross, which is we haven't identified which coin that goes to, but what they would do is they would make a mark on the other side of the coin that was supposed to clue you into which coin it was supposed to weigh. And for comparative example, this is a set of these. This example is a little bit later, and is a little bit later, and is a French example, but is an example of one of these in its full set. So you can see all of these little metal discs in here with a scale included in this, and these metal squares are all marked. So this was actually essentially a merchant's set of coin weights with a set of the coin weights and a scale to go with it, to be able to proof coinage of different kinds in commercial transactions. And this is a later example, but it does in fact still have a coin weight with a stylized cross on it. So there's aspects of this that continue as representations for particular kinds of coins. And the stylized cross is probably a Spanish real, but we haven't actually identified the coin. I'm showing this in a set because our one artifact, right? We don't have the whole set. We don't have the scales, but we've got a coin weight, and the coin weight would have been in a set that was this very specialized, a very specialized toolkit for a merchant or a trader, to be able to check the value of coinage that they're being given against kind of a set standard of coin weights. So it's a very interesting artifact to find in this context on Burial Hill. So it's in this structure with some patent farthings, a bale seal from the trade of cloth, some plate iron stock that was probably, again, a trade good. So it's pointing to this small but important cluster of artifacts that are giving us kind of a view of the commercial and mercantile aspects of the colony. So maybe this is pointing us towards one of these buildings that kind of had a dual function, had some company functions and was involved some with the kind of trade and commercial aspects of the colony, but also serving as someone's house on Burial Hill, with a fireplace and with the pottery there that's needed to kind of prepare and eat their food in this structure.
Well, and we have a question just about coins and how usual they would have been in Plymouth in the early years. And so this person is saying that I always assumed they did a lot of bartering to begin with. So when did they start using coins?
You know, again, great point. There's not necessarily a lot of coins in circulation. And so definitely a lot of goods are being exchanged. Goods are being exchanged instead of a lot of coins being exchanged. So you know, I think that's an accurate point, and I think that points a little bit to how specialized finding a coin weight and some coins in association with these buildings is. You know, certainly a coin weight set, not something that people would normally have. So that's like someone who's very much got the special tools for trade as a merchant or a ship captain or something like that. The coins that we find there, not a lot of coins in circulation. So again, I think a few artifacts there that small in number, but pointing to these very kind of specific functions of this building. My last slide is a big shout out, thank you to all of our supporters of our work over the years. I'm happy to thank you all for coming to join in today. And I hope some parts of this sparked your interests and got you intrigued. And I challenge you to go find our excavation on Burial Hill, because we filled it all in and put grass seed back down. So if you're in Plymouth and go walking through, take a look and see what you can see. And I'm happy to answer any questions, any additional questions.
We do have some additional questions, David. One actually has to do with when you do fill in your holes, do you put a barrier layer down at the bottom?
Yes, we do. We put down the trick is to put down something that protects it and marks it, but doesn't stop water from going through. So we actually put down what's called geotextile in the bottoms of the excavations, which is kind of a fabric that's used in construction, in building construction or road construction, because it survives in the ground, but it lets water go through, so water doesn't pool up in weird areas below the surface. We do this for ourselves so that we can dig it out, but we also do this because, you know, some years from now, some archaeologists will be back to this site and trying to figure out exactly where we dug, and we like leaving that as a little gift for the future archaeologists too. I like to think it's people coming back for the 500th. So 100 years from now, what will the archaeologists be thinking or doing then? Maybe they won't need to dig it all. They have such great technology, but we do kind of put something down on the bottom before we fill, yes.
And another question related to that, do you fence the site to ensure it will be safe?
Yeah, while we're working, we fence. While we're working, you know, we when we're there during the day, we try to you know, take the fence down so that people can come see what we're doing. But when we leave the site at night, we fence it off, and we cover over our excavation units too. You know, this as that's a good question, because, you know, hey, why don't we leave the site open? Well, one of the reasons we don't leave the site open is that we don't want people to fall into the hole, right? So especially if we're down deep onto the floor of a deeply buried building. But we cover over and fence our excavation when we're not present.
And we have a couple questions about objects that you found. So going back to the coin weight, Isaac Allerton was a merchant tailor who would have had a coin weight set and bale seals for cloth since he was a tailor. Do you feel he might be a candidate for ownership of this house?
Sure. You know, it's hard to tell exactly whose house we're in. And, you know, um, as I frequently tell people, I do my archaeology with both my heart and my head. And with my heart, I'll say Allerton, sure, great connections there, the merchant connections and the cloth. With my head, I can't say whose house it is. So we do try and puzzle this out sometimes. Like, do these artifacts give us any clues about whose stuff we're looking at? I'm not sure we've come to a good answer on that yet.
Well, we also have a question about the pipes that you have found, or the pipe fragments. And do you know if they were Dutch or English? There's a question if they have heel marks on them, or any details like that that might give you additional clues.
Sure. So far, we've only gotten, our pipe collection is small. And so far, we've only gotten one clearly marked pipe, and that was a Bristol, England pipe maker. And so far, no marked Dutch pipes. Sorting out the Dutch and the English material from this time is kind of a problem for us, and it's interesting because I showed a picture of kind of a green glazed pottery. If you show that to English archaeologists, they'll be like, oh, that's English green borderware. But if you look at examples of Dutch pottery from the same time, there's, oh, that's Dutch green courseware. So we are still in the process of trying to sort out some very basic things about some of these artifacts. And so sorting all of the pipes into Dutch or English, and even all the pottery into Dutch and English, that's still very much a work in progress.
We have a few questions about just the spaces where you're able to dig. So one person was wondering if more questions could be answered if the tree roots were not there and you could actually dig in the area where the tree roots are. And then someone else was wondering if there were areas further down from Burial Hill that do not have buildings on them that might be potential sites for future excavations, or if there are even specific houses you're trying to find that you might choose a site to try to locate a particular house.
Yeah, all great ideas and great questions. The tree, we go, I don't know what to say about the tree. I love the tree. I think it's beautiful. The tree's older than me. So, it's not as old as the site we're digging, despite how big it looks. It wasn't there at the time, probably wasn't there at the time of the American Civil War in the 1860s. So it's more recent than that. So it's not quite as old as it looks, but, part of our deal with the town is that we don't kill all the trees when we go digging. So and on Burial Hill, there's lots of people who really feel like some of the historic trees on Burial Hill are part of what makes the site so special. So we've been trying to be sensitive to that in our work. And in terms of other places in the town, it's been interesting because ever since we started working in the town, we kind of try another place, work some at Burial Hill, try a lot, work some at Burial Hill, go down towards the water, work some at Burial Hill, go down towards the mill. We've done a lot of digging in lots of different areas in Plymouth. And really what I've come away with more than anything else is don't let the small town look fool you. It's not a small town in terms of the history of how it grew up. And a lot of the places that look most like parks, don't believe it. They're all a creation of people in the past. So it's the modern environment is very deceptive. the area where we're working along Burial Hill, it had stables and small industry and a school and a steam engine and those are all gone now, and it looks, it's very pristine and has never been touched. The whole area of Brewster Garden. This is one of Anne's specialties. The whole area of Brewster Garden, beautiful park now, looks all natural. Looks like it must have always been so. No, it's a creation. Coles Hill, another creation. So the archaeology there is just really complex, and very much what I would call urban archaeology, despite the look of the small town. So we continue to explore lots of places and other areas in the town, but it's been really complicated in terms of our ability to find parts of the early town still preserved.
Well, and this is another question we have, just that everything seems to be under a lot of dirt. And so does the dirt build up over the years that much? And I'm sure that it depends on where you're digging, because some dirt is actually brought in to fill in spots.
Yes. Exactly as you were describing. It really depends on what people have done on a particular spot, how deep we have to dig. And that was kind of a shock to me when I began this work in Plymouth, because I've been 8 feet below the ground surface in multiple places in Plymouth and not at the bottom. And people ask, how deep do archaeologists dig? And I was like, we dig to the bottom. And it's like, okay, that's not really much of an answer. What's the bottom? The bottom is when you go to geology, and we're down where there's no artifacts and it's just natural sediments. In some areas of Plymouth, we've been 8 feet below the ground surface, and we're only down to 1845. Because since 1845, people put so much fill on top of certain areas that they've totally changed the topography. And so it really depends on what people have done on a certain part of Plymouth, how deep we have to dig. And it's very it's been a real challenge, and part of why I say don't believe that it looks like a small town when you're 8 feet below the surface and you're down in 1840s industrial fill. It's not just a kind of this pristine little small town that it looks like today.
Yeah. Well, I know that we're approaching 10 minutes past 2 o'clock. So we have I'm sure we have so many more questions that people will think of as they mull all of the great content that you've given us. And just a few to wrap up with. So folks are curious about when the digs began and where the artifacts are. Where are they being displayed, or will they be displayed in the future?
Right. So we started this project in earnest in about 2012. So I guess next year will mark 10 years that we've been working on this. That's pretty long for a project. And the artifacts ultimately, right now, most of the artifacts are in the lab at UMass Boston, where we're washing and cataloging and trying to identify them. Ultimately, they're going to all be curated at Plymouth Patuxent Museums. So they're going to come back to the town of Plymouth when our analysis is done. And there are 2 exhibits up right now. One is in the town courthouse building, right on the town square. We have a small exhibit talking about some of our exploration along the edge of Burial Hill. And there's also a larger exhibit in the visitor center at Plymouth Patuxent Museum that talks a lot about some of the evidence that I was presenting today of our work on Burial Hill.
Great. And I know that someone else mentioned that they are an Alden descendant, and that there's an archaeological exhibit up right now at the Alden Historic Site in Duxbury. And she was wondering if there was going to be, some comparing of notes between you and then the previous excavations, because of course, Plymouth, there have been archaeologists in Plymouth, through the generations, looking at different sites through Plymouth, and then, Duxbury, Kingston, other Plymouth colony towns. So I'm sure that's part of all the work that you'll be doing as you go through the artifacts, and you'll be looking at what else we've discovered in the past, and that's part of building that larger story for sure.
Yeah, and quite honestly, I didn't talk about it very much, but that's kind of it's almost a whole nother project that we've been engaged in, is re-examining a lot of the collections from earlier excavations around Plymouth Bay. And that's a huge and complicated project, and very interesting. And another way besides using our historical clues to try and understand whose house we might be looking at, if we can actually make some comparisons across site, it gives us a chance to try and see how similar or different artifacts are from other sites that might help us piece together the story of whose artifacts, whose trash we're looking at.
Right. And then you'll publish a book, and then a catalog, and there's so much. And will you be back for more digs? And is there any way that volunteers can get involved, or what's going to happen next?
Yeah, it's one of the downsides of missing 2020 and our dig in 2021 is we didn't have quite the opportunities to let people participate that we've had in the past, because of the need to kind of have more careful safety protocols in place. And right now, I have to say, honestly, I'm not sure we've made a decision about whether we're going to dig next summer or not, because we're kind of getting to the point where we need to figure out whether these pipes are English or Dutch. Is this pottery English or Dutch? I need to learn a whole lot more about coin weights. Who's going to figure out what kind of charcoal is in all these soil samples that we brought back? And what do the chemical results say? So, there's all of this data that's been building up. And in some ways, I think we're getting close to where we need to have a pause in our digging to kind of pull some of our data together. So that's how it feels right now. But that, as always, a work in progress.
Well, thank you so much, David. We're now at 15 minutes past 2 o'clock. So you've been very generous with your time and gracious to answer more questions as we've gone over this afternoon. And we still have a few more questions that folks have asked that I'll try to go back to, and maybe I can share them with you, and you can provide brief answers. But thank you so much. And a reminder to everyone that we do have 2 more First Saturday programs in 2021. So November 6th at 1 p.m. will be the First Thanksgiving with Donna Curtin, the Executive Director of Pilgrim Hall Museum. And then on December 4th at 1 p.m., I will be doing the program, and I'll be exploring and talking about first visitors to Plymouth and the creation of a tourist town. So exploring this idea about people coming to Plymouth. And I'm going to actually start with some 17th century visitors. So I don't think we can call them tourists, but they certainly came to town and left records of their impressions and opinions of Plymouth Colony. And then we'll go from there and look at some of the 19th century visitors and how they shaped our community. So hope you can join us then. David, are there any programs at UMass Boston that you'd like to highlight, or?
We are just back face to face and in a science experiment at the moment. We're still moving very cautiously in terms of welcoming visitors to our campus and kind of figuring out what we're going to do for the year. So nothing in particular to advertise at the moment, but thanks for the suggestion.
Well, and you do post, you have the Archaeological Center has a blog where you do post, it shares some information on some of the artifacts and some of the steps in the whole process. So I'm sure that's a place that people can go to see what's happening.
Yeah, good reminder. Thank you. Thanks for
Yeah.
that.
Oh, I love looking at the blog. So, and as a
Yeah.
reminder, this program has been recorded, and so we will upload that whole video. So if you missed parts of it, you can watch it on our Facebook page or the website, PlymouthAntiquarian.org, or Pilgrim Hall Museum's website. So I think that brings us all the way through such a wonderful presentation, David. Everyone has been expressing their appreciation for your just sharing so much wonderful information with us and all the work that you've been doing. And please extend our thanks to your team too, and all of your supporters. You know, it's just wonderful to have you here in Plymouth, and we're glad you were able to come in 2021, and we'll see what the future holds.
Thanks, everyone. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Have a great afternoon, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.